Okay, thank you very much, Josh. Welcome, everyone. As you can hear from my accent, I'm also originally a native of the UK. I've been living in Israel for some 12 years or so. So we have three wonderful speakers for you this evening, operating in different areas of Israeli life, and all with things that I think will hopefully whet your appetites for coming to Israel on a Masa program and spending a longer period of time here doing something worthwhile that can educate you and inform you and also I think develop you both professionally, personally, and also as a Jew and a Zionist. Okay, so our first speaker is going to be Laura Gilinski, who is VP of Philanthropic Partnerships at Startup Nation Central. I'm sure many of you will have read the book Startup Nation, and Startup Nation Central is the organization that sort of grew out of that book. In her capacity, Laura is responsible for all of Startup Nation Central's development-related issues, including partner cultivation, retention, support. Before that, she worked for the Israel Museum in Development and International Relations, and before that, as Chief Development and PR Officer at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. She's worked for over a decade in high tech as Director of Corporate Marketing at the Ex Libris Group and Director of Product Marketing at Wiscom Technologies. She's also someone that is an old friend who I haven't seen for a long time, so it's very nice to see her on this call. Laura Gilinski, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. This is exciting. And, oh, can you hear me? Okay. And I'm very happy to be here tonight. We've actually, when I was at the Hartman Institute, we had a few scholars who were on your program, and I think both of them made Aliyah, so we were very happy, and they were like super people, so that was exciting. So as Paul said, I work at Startup Nation Central, which is a very interesting and kind of unique organization. It's a nonprofit organization that acts like a startup, and it's sort of on the intersection of nonprofit on one side and high tech on the other. So it's quite an interesting place. And as Paul mentioned, you know, people kind of for years were getting off the plane with the book Startup Nation. They'd all read it, and you know, heads of state were coming to the prime minister with the book under their arm and saying, "Okay, show us the Startup Nation." And it was a little bit hard because there wasn't really a one-stop shop where you could go to be introduced to the Startup Nation. So Startup Nation Central was founded basically to create a bridge between organizations or companies looking for high tech, for technology abroad, and the startups here in Israel. And the kind of premise for the whole organization is to ensure the security of the state of Israel by keeping its economy strong, and its economy is of course very connected to the startup world and the tech ecosystem that we have here in Israel. So we do basically three things, and I'll talk about them very shortly. All of our work is based on research, so we have a very big research team that kind of is the core of the organization. They collect a lot of data, which we then share. Everything is completely not, it's not for profit, and we don't have any fees associated with the different kind of services that we provide. So we have a very big web, kind of a database that anyone can go onto. It's called the Finder. It kind of maps out the entire tech ecosystem. So there's about 7,000 companies on the Finder, and you can really, very well segmented. You can really find out a lot about the tech ecosystem. But what started to happen were very big organizations or companies from abroad didn't really want to have an analyst sitting there trying to figure out which are the best companies or which are the best technologies that they should be interacting with. So they asked if they could come to us and we could like prepare a list for them, or basically at the end of the day, a kind of reverse roadshow where they would come to Israel after we'd spoken to them for a few months and really worked with them to distill their exact pain points in work, and then meet them or introduce them to the companies that we thought would really be able to meet their pain points and offer them success in whatever area of technology they were looking to reach. And for what we see as our success then is if any kind of economic agreement is reached, if a purchase is made, if there's technology, like a proof of concept developed, if there's a scout on the ground, if they open up an R&D center, all of those items or successes are things that we see as answering our KPIs. So those are kind of the areas that we look at, and we have business development scouts who are out and about identifying different companies that we might want to bring here that really have no affiliation or interest in Israel, beside identifying the technologies that can help them, and then come here to actually meet those technologies. When, on the other hand, we have a lot of work that we do here in the ecosystem with the actual companies that are going to be then presenting to the large corporations that we bring to Israel, because the moment that a startup is born here in Israel, it's very clear that its eyes and its direction is to the international market, because it can't become a big company without actually working in the international market. So we spend a lot of time working with entrepreneurs here in order to really prepare them for making that connection internationally. We do a lot of capacity building with the companies here. So we have kind of the grassroots part of our work, which we do with the companies here. We have the international part where we're bringing in organizations and companies from abroad all the time to be introducing them to startup companies. And in the center of what we do, we have the technology. So when I spoke to the people who kind of prepared me for this presentation, they asked me to note 3 challenges that we kind of deal with in terms of how do we ensure that the startup nation stays as it is, and what do we see as the main challenges that we have to overcome. And the main one that we have is really human capital. So we have a kind of a dearth of human capital to be able to fill the different positions that we have a continuously growing need in Israel. So we have in our latest human capital report, we do an annual report with the JP Morgan Chase Foundation. We found that there's about 18,000 open positions in Israel in kind of the core high-tech development areas. And so we are working very hard to try and bring in different new populations to fill those kind of positions. So that might be women, that might be the Arab population, ultra-Orthodox people, to really bulk up and create more kind of talent to be leading into the high-tech sector. The second thing that we see as a challenge is that there's sort of a lot of stories about what in the DNA of Israeli people make them the people of the startup nation. We have a lot of different, if you haven't read the book, the kind of Cliff's Note is that it's a combination of the army and the different skills that people learn in the army, both leadership and technology. The fact that we're an immigrant population, and specifically we talk about the immigration, the 1 million people more or less that came in from Russia in the 90s, which was a huge boost to our startup nation. And thirdly was the government's role in kind of catalyzing the tech sector, but then also being smart enough to sort of leave it growing by itself. But the question is now that we feel is that we can't actually leave the startup nation just to be kind of living on its laurels or something, and not talking about actually creating infrastructure to create the next generation of people who are going to be the heads of the startup nation. And the third thing is that we feel that it's very challenging that at the moment we often sell or move our startup companies out of the country at a very young stage. So we actually don't grow very many companies here to be as large as they could. And that's another thing that we think is one of the challenges that we should be dealing with in order to really create stability and sustainability in the startup nation. Right now, we're just coming out of our Corona period, and we definitely are seeing that there's going to be there's probably a challenge that's going to be coming up now with a lot of people being laid off of work. We specifically see that this is an issue with underrepresented populations that are already having trouble, and we're going to have to re-enter them into the tech sector. On the other hand, we also see that there have been quite a few opportunities that have risen from this whole COVID situation in terms of places that Israel does see leadership or show leadership. Most of them what we're seeing is very interesting is actually in the areas of cyber. And then another interesting kind of sector is the assistive technology sector, or possibly things that are connected to people being put into remote situations and having to be connected with the world. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at now. I would be happy to take questions afterward.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. I should have said at the beginning, actually, you can write questions in the chat box if you like while our speakers are speaking and they occur to you, and we can come to them at the end of the panel session. Okay, thank you very much, Laura. I'm going to introduce now Professor Gil Troy, who's a distinguished scholar in North American history at McGill University in Montreal, currently living in Jerusalem. Gil is a prolific writer of books. I have a couple of them on the bookshelf back there, in fact. His most recent, The Zionist Ideas, Visions for the Jewish Homeland, Then, Now, Tomorrow, is the most comprehensive Zionist collection ever published, building on Arthur Herzberg's classic The Zionist Idea, which some of you may know. Gill explores the backstories, dreams, and legacies of more than 170 Jewish visionaries from the 1800s until today. As well as his books, he's published essays in the American, Canadian, and Israeli media, including writing essays for the New York Times campaign stops. He used to have a weekly column for the Daily Beast and writes a weekly column for the Jerusalem Post. He's also someone that I think, while you're in Israel, in whatever program you're on, there's a very good chance you'll come across Gil, because he's also a prolific educator about Zionism and Israel today. And we're very happy to have him with us today. Gil.
Thank you, Paul. And hello, everybody. I hope everybody's safe and sane, which is one of the major challenges of our time. I want to talk to you today about what I think is the most compelling and exciting thing about Masa, which is cherry tomato Zionism. What I mean by that, let's hold off. First, a little bit about myself. My real job, if you will, is being an American historian. And my real name is not Gil Troy, but Gilad Troyansky. Now, why I use these terms real, we can talk about in group therapy. But Gilad Troyansky was, in a sense, my Christian name, the name that I was born with. My father, like so many of you, was told to fit in and stand out. A good New York Jew, a good American Jew. And he had this name Troyansky, and he gave it an Anskyectomy in order to fit in. But as a Zionist, as someone who wanted to be a part of this chain of conversation going back thousands of years, rooted in our homeland, who wanted to be a part of this extraordinary network of people all over the world, not better or worse than anybody else, but just different, connected somehow, he saddled me with a weirdo named Gilad. Now, growing up in New York, going to Jewish day school, where all my buddies were named, it's a different generation, James and Mitchell and Kenneth, having a name like Gilad made me really uncomfortable. And so I gave my own name, Gilad, an oddectomy, and so I was Gil Troy. That means I get great reception at Greek restaurants. I get a lot of Helen of Troy jokes. Now I get a lot of Troy the movie jokes. And more important, it meant that I too could fit in. And like so many of you, I worked really hard and had sky-high grades and that perfect CV, and wrote that insane essay at the age of 17 about how I am a master of the universe, and if this university doesn't accept me, the entire world is going to collapse. And I was lucky enough to get accepted to Harvard. And at Harvard, I get excited by American history, and I go on to graduate school, and there I am teaching the revolutionary transformation of America, American Revolution, sorry, Brits. And Richard John comes up to me. Now, you know how we American Jews look at WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, as the real Americans. And WASPs have a tendency to have first names that are last names and last names that are first names. So Richard John goes up to Gil Troy, and because I could also be Troy Gill, Troy Donahue, Troy Aikman. And Richard John says, oh, there are so few WASPs like us around nowadays. And I put on my heaviest New York accent and say, even fewer than you think. Now, I didn't experience that as anti-Semitism. I experienced that as a message. Hey, I fit in. I belong. I'm one of them. I can pass. And I can have a rich Jewish life at home, but I can be a man on the street, a person on the street, a real American. Now, I tell you that story to say that I'm not one of these guys who comes and waves his finger at the younger generation and say, oh, you kids, you're so terrible. We worked out all our identity issues, and you guys are the ones who are confused. We've been assimilating for decades. We've been confused for decades, and I've spent most of my life balancing, which is why I use terms like real job and real name. So much so that, in fact, I built my career as an American historian. I taught for many years at McGill University as Gil Troy, American historian, neutral person. So much so that, and I'm one of those senior professors, which is a nice word for old, who likes to teach the survey course. And I would always teach 1865 to the present, the second half of the survey course. And inevitably, every April, the second, third, fourth week, 2, 3 students from Toronto, McGill University is in Montreal, 2, 3, 4 students from Toronto would come to me and go, Professor Troy, we have to take off the next 2 nights, as if we meet at night, right? But they're all nervous, they're speaking to the professor. And I'd go, why? They go, we have to go home to Toronto for the Seder. And I'd go, well, you're gonna make up the work? And they go, yeah. I said, will you do me one more favor? They say, yeah. I said, will you make sure to have a Chag Sameach, a happy holiday? Oh, he's Jewish, we didn't know. And then of course we'd start a conversation. Again, playing with that inside outside, fitting in, standing out. In 2007, my wife, 4 children, and I came to Israel on sabbatical, and we never left. And it's turned into the world's longest sabbatical. And now I live in Israel. I have a weekly column in the Jerusalem Post, which actually David Horowitz was kind enough to hire me for many years ago. And I write books, as Paul was so kind to mention. But most important, I'm trying to have a conversation about Zionism. I'm trying to have a conversation about what does it mean to us to be a part of this thing called the Jewish people? And what does it mean to return to our homeland? Well aware that others have rights to that homeland. But of course, I'm also talking about the situation in New York, where in Manhattan, white settlers bought Manhattan for $24 from natives. You can have conflicting claims to a homeland and still have legitimacy. And what does it mean? A people returning to their homeland to establish a state. Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, establishing Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. That's the basic political Zionist idea. And that's an idea that Jews and non-Jews should be learning about, partially for Jews because it's part of our story, but also because all of us as liberal nationalists in a world where nationalism is only seen both by the left and the right as toxic, as xenophobic. And I, as an American historian, can't explain nationalism, can't explain America without talking about constructive nationalism, liberal nationalism, a nationalism that soars, a nationalism that dreams, not a nationalism that builds up walls. We can use Zionism as an opportunity to ask questions about identity. And that's where cherry tomato Zionism comes in. The exciting thing to me about Masa, and about birthright, and about coming to Israel for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, or even for 10 days, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, is you get a taste of what I think is the most important move occurring in Zionism today. From political Zionism, people, land, state, to identity Zionism. Cherry tomato Zionism is the notion that, you know, I like Israel, not because it's the best, not because it's the only, not necessarily because it's mine, but because I like the cherry tomatoes. I like the weather. You can't just come here to eat ideology. But when you come and there's something that you enjoy, there's something that charms you, there's a sense of usness in the country, then you have an opportunity to start thinking about your life in America or Canada or the UK or wherever you are, and think about what the experience here is in a sister democracy, not a perfect democracy, and part of Zionism is also perfecting the state, but being a part of the conversation of what this young country and what this young country's patriotic nationalist ideology, i.e. Zionism, can be, and where you fit in and what you can learn from. And so, yes, you'll come and you'll have amazing experiences at Startup Nation and interning and on programs. Yes, You'll be a part of the political debate, whether you're from the left or the right, religious or non-religious. But I hope you'll also join this broader conversation of identity Zionism, which is, who am I? And what can being a part of something greater than myself, of understanding that too much of, especially American society, especially modern society, is about the me, the my, the more, the now. And Israel is also about the land of us. Israel is also about the land of eternal time. Israel is also about questions not just of autonomy, of individuality, but of community and sanctity. And being a part of that conversation, how you can enjoy the cherry tomatoes, find your way in, but also more important, be a part of this broader conversation about not just who am I, not just how can I be a better person, not just how can I make the world a better place, but the big question we're all struggling with, and I'm still struggling with. How do I find meaning in this world? We need our health, we need our safety, we need our sanity. We've certainly learned that over the last couple of months, but we also need frameworks, platforms for meaning. And my identity Zionism, my move from political Zionism to identity Zionism, my cherry tomato Zionism is my platform for finding meaning, finding community, finding sanctity, and reaching out and having a conversation that's not just about Israel's rights and wrongs, but Israel's opportunities and its cherry tomatoes too. L'chaim, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gil. That was great. Okay, I'm going to introduce finally David Horowitz. There's a lot I could say about him. I'm going to keep it short though. He's the founding editor of Times of Israel, which I'm sure you all read. And I will just add that if you're an English reader, an English speaker, and you want to be up to date and get the best analysis of Israeli politics and current affairs, and you're not reading David Horowitz, you really should be. So David, please.
Thank you, Paul. And pleasure to be on this call, and a pleasure to share it with the other two speakers. And I wasn't planning to be, very personal, but I thought Gil's presentation was fascinating. So I'll just pick up a little bit about on that and explain what on earth I'm doing here, and then what we try to do at the Times of Israel, and then a little bit about the context in which we're doing what we do. And as Laura also said, hopefully answer any questions that you can throw at us. So I'm here because I guess a lot of family history in there. My family were a rabbinical family in Germany not very many generations ago. My great-grandfather founded an Orthodox synagogue in Germany, and they were that very quite typical mixture of very German Jews, but very Orthodox Jews. They saw themselves as integrated into Germany, and they were able to reconcile that and practice their Judaism. And when the Nazis arrived, my grandfather by then assumed that their beloved Germany would kick them out pretty quickly, instead of which, of course, they didn't. In 1938, my great-grandfather's shul was burned down on Kristallnacht, and by then they had fled to England. And really, we went in the space of a few generations as follows. My grandfather was actually a conscript in the German army in World War I, was nearly killed fighting for Germany in World War I. I have his Iron Cross at home, which when you think about what the Iron Cross came to constitute in World War II is quite the thing. So nearly killed fighting as a conscript for Germany in World War I. By World War II, my father was a young man at the start of the war, a refugee from Germany in England. By the end of the war, old enough to volunteer and did some kind of reconnaissance photography in the Royal Air Force. So in the space of one generation fighting for Germany to fighting for the Allies against Nazi Germany. When you grow up with that kind of family history, and for the first time in a couple of thousand years, the Jewish people got their country back, as happened in 1948 with the establishment of Israel, it's very compelling to want to be part of it. When you trained in journalism, which is all I've ever done, when the weather is a great deal better in Jerusalem than it is in London, where I grew up, when you meet this gorgeous redhead American woman in a political science class at Hebrew University, soon after coming to Israel, it becomes quite the sensible thing to build a life here. The journalism part of what I do, which is, like I say, everything it's the only thing I've ever done. Unlike Gil, I have to say, I was a terrible student. I wouldn't have got into any half-decent university. It's only when I started doing journalism that my brain sort of started to kick into gear. I think journalism is really important. And I think maybe part of the essence of this call is relevant here. We're a country that's pretty young. There are countries that are our age and even younger, but the modern incarnation of Israel is pretty fresh. And there's a lot that's still being shaped about this country. And there are dangers, by the way, that things that Israel does can be alienating, by definition, will be alienating to people of on different places of the political spectrum. But much about this country is still being shaped. It's still up for grabs. And therefore, coming here on the kind of programs that you're looking to come here on, you're taking a first small step into the shaping of a country that has not finalized many things about itself, including even things as fundamental as how big it is going to be, how it's going to reconcile, how it does reconcile the conflicting challenges of being a first world democracy, but having respect for the religion that sustained the Jewish people in exile, for a couple of millennia. There's so much at stake here. And doing journalism in that context is, I think, incredibly important and tremendously fulfilling. I'll tell you a little bit about the Times of Israel, which has been going for a little over 8 years, coming up on 8.5 years now. I've been editing the Jerusalem Post and had certain, how can I put this discreetly, but budgetary disagreements, which were entirely legitimate. And I decided I'd like to try and start something of my own and established this title in February 2012 with the support of a very generous partner who has no say in our editorial content. And I wanted to set up something that would be fair-minded, not ideologically knee-jerk, sort of partisan linked to this or that political party, that would try to report things fairly and have a blog platform, which we do, and maybe even some of you have written for, because we've had about 9,000 or 10,000 people who've posted one or more blogs over the years on the Times of Israel. So fair-minded reporting, hopefully breaking ground reporting, analysis enabling people to understand what's going on here and around the Jewish world, and opinions across the spectrum. So that's what I tried to set up, which has been pretty successful. I mean, staggeringly successful if you want to look at numbers, which we don't hide. So we have about 8, 9, 10 million unique users a month, which means not 8, 9, 10 million unique people. If you log in on your phone and on your computer, that'd be 2 uniques, but a lot of people, millions of people coming to the site, tens of millions of page views. I don't think that's the only barometer of anything. So digressing briefly, the Daily Mail is one of the world's most trafficked news sites, huge amounts of traffic, but it is considered so, shall we say, dubious that Wikipedia won't let you use the Daily Mail as a source. How times have changed. We all used to laugh at Wikipedia. Now Wikipedia won't let you cite a really, really resonant news site as a source. So traffic isn't everything. We try and cover things accurately. I think it's been incredibly important in the last few weeks and months as this pandemic has battered us all. One of the things we've tried to do is make it clear, is there really a vaccine arriving tomorrow, or is there progress towards a vaccine? What do we know about this virus? What should we make of Israel's tolls as compared to other people? What can we understand about scientists in Israel especially, but anywhere else, who are trying to tackle this? And gratifyingly, I would say, stories that are not sensationalist, that give you the tools to try and work out what really matters, what's really dramatic, what's less so. Those articles get pretty widely read as well. For us, working in journalism in the last few weeks has been very difficult because, like everybody else, we're working in a society where it's where safety is often lies in distance. Journalists have to be out and about if they're doing their jobs well. Legally, we're allowed to, actually. Journalists in Israel have not been constrained in any way, even at the heights of the lockdowns. If you had your press card, you could go wherever you wanted, but you don't want to be putting other people in danger. You don't want to be putting the people you're in contact with in danger. So it has been constraining, like everywhere else, I think. We've had reporters who had many kids at home for more hours of the day than they were used to. We've had reporters who were quarantined because they'd come back from somewhere, or because they were in a place where it turned out that somebody with the virus was in close proximity to them. But we've tried to do our job, and I think we've done it pretty well. And I've been struck, and this is something that the journalism tries to bridge in terms of the gulf in the way this pandemic has been handled in different countries, how societies have dealt with this pandemic. It's really interesting, and things that maybe, I don't know where you are in the world on this call, but wherever you are, your society's experience is different from everybody else's. Really, the way that different countries have handled this is quite striking. And the assumption that we all have that the way we've handled it is the norm is way off. You know, early in this crisis, I was doing a call like this, a webinar like this with some people in Philadelphia early in the crisis. And I was talking about our relatively stringent lockdown and how we were grappling with this. And I could tell that they weren't quite getting what I was saying because America was not at the stage that we were. I think we locked down a little bit faster and there was a greater awareness maybe earlier on. Certainly when you compare it to the place where I grew up, to England, to Britain, Israel was a lot quicker to work out what was going on here. The way that society has dealt with this, I'll talk about the Israel element, and you'll judge it against your own wherever you are in the world. You know, we took for granted in Israel that even in a country that argues about everything, I mean, Jews and Arabs argue about stuff, and left and right, and Orthodox and secular, you know, the pandemic strikes, and Israelis essentially did what they were told. The airport was broadly closed off. The Prime Minister said, if you love people who are in the vulnerable age groups, stay away from them. They introduced pretty effective digital tracking, so you'd know if you'd been close to somebody and you were told to go into quarantine. And we weren't perfect. We're not the most disciplined of societies, but we were pretty good. Israelis thought, you know what, that makes sense. We'll heed the regulations. And it turns out that that was not necessarily the norm all over the world. So this very divided society that argues about everything, when it came to the sort of mutual consideration, the mutual goodwill, I mean, at the most fundamental level, Israel has fared really, really well. And I think that's worth highlighting. And if there's one kind of emblematic image of Israel over the last few weeks, and it's so counterintuitive, it's the ambulance crew outside their ambulance, two paramedics, one Jewish, one Muslim, caught in a photograph next to their rig, one of them praying towards Mecca, the other praying towards Jerusalem, which happened to be in opposite directions. And there's this, divided Israel that disagrees about everything, somehow holding it together across those divides and dealing with this pandemic pretty effectively. The last thing I'll say, and then I want to shut up. So you're thinking of coming here on these programs, and I hope you'll be on these programs. I think I find Israel incredibly compelling. Obviously, as a news person, I'm obsessed about it in all the directions it takes. But it seeps into your system. It's this extraordinary, insistently thriving country, and that's very much relevant to what Laura was saying. You know, we are on the western edge of a largely hostile landmass, loads of people all around that want to drive us into the sea, and we don't just survive, we thrive, and we innovate, and we are a light unto the nations in many ways. We taught Africa drip irrigation. I don't know if we're going to be the people who find the vaccine or the treatment for COVID-19, but boy, are we trying, and all kinds of other things. It's incredible to be part of this country, like I say, that's still being shaped. And I hope that, sooner rather than later, we'll see you, actually literally see you, and maybe even be able to shake hands with you when you're in Israel. I don't know how your program is going to play out, but I hope they'll work out. And I hope that this incredible, thriving Israel, with all of its complexities and all of its arguments, seeps into your systems as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Okay, so I'm going to go to a couple of questions that we have. I'll ask people to keep on thinking of questions and to write them into the chat box as they come. A question that came up actually from Masa, which maybe all of you could have a stab at, is do regular Israelis and also the Israeli government understand the importance of diaspora Jewry? Who wants to go first? Gil.
It's interesting. For Shavuot, we had a tikkun. Tikkun is an all-night learning at the Hartman Institute. It was socially distanced, masked, and the 55 to 75-year-olds usually show up, didn't. But we had a fascinating conversation, and in preparation for it, I came across an article in Makor Rishon, which is an Israeli newspaper that tends to talk to the religious community, written by an American Jew in quite a beautiful Hebrew, saying, "Where are you, Israel? We're suffering in New York. We're bleeding in New York, and we're not hearing your support. We were there for you during the Gulf War and the Gaza War and the Intifada. Where are you now?" And I read that, and I said, my next column in the Jerusalem Post is going to have to say, "Message we care." And the truth is that, first of all, you know, as David was describing at the very beginning, when you're in lockdown, it's easy to get into shutdown and get to, you know, true isolation, and also, you know, a little bit of self-pity. But Israel is, and we're still not out of the woods, but we're working our way back to normalcy. I had this fascinating experience today. I was in a restaurant and I ordered coffee and felt really, you know, kind of normal. And as we do that, it's really important that we let our diaspora brothers and sisters know that we care. Now, first of all, the most dramatic way we're caring is what David was saying. Now, think about it. Israel is so small. Israel's like a pimple on the skin of the world. That's how small we are. I mean, we like to think we're a beauty mark, but we're really, really, really small. And the fact that we're up there competing with the United States of America and with other major countries as to be one of the people to be the first in vaccines or tests or treatment is extraordinary. So that's the way we're helping. It's kind of like Franklin Roosevelt always said, the way I'm helping the Jews in World War II is simply by winning the war. So we're trying to be Dr. Win the War. But more than that, and I'm sorry to say, I don't want to get political, but we do have a prime minister who's a little bit distracted with problems, some of which are his own making. But it's very important that what we hear on the streets of Israel and what I'm hearing in the Batei Cafe and the coffee shops as we start going back into it, and I'm hearing among my Israeli friends, not just we Olim, we immigrants, we are really concerned about what's happening in the United States. And we're especially concerned about what's happening with American Jews and Canadian Jews and British Jews. Not because we're better than anybody else, as I was saying earlier, but because we are connected. Because when you're part of the Jewish people, you're never alone. We are wired to worry about one another. And so, yes, Israelis are concerned. And part of the excitement, I think, of contemplating having Masa programs next year, when I know many of my friends in university are expecting that in the fall, things are still not going to be fully functional. But you come here, you might be able to have to pay the cost of a 2-week bidud, 2-week isolation. And then you might be able to be in the mainstream of a society, which is a couple of months ahead of other countries in getting back to normal. I'm not predicting. Historians never predict. I always say it's hard enough to predict the past. I can't begin to predict the future. But I do want to emphasize message, we care. And this bridge that we're building, even by taking time to be a part of this phone call, is a symbol of that.
Thanks, Gil. Laura, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking when Gil was speaking, I didn't tell you about my personal life, but that's okay. But I think that, you know, I came at a very, very young age, so I sound American, and I say to people, everyone, like, you know, I speak, and then as people go, you're very American. I'm like, no, I'm really Israeli. And Gil and I worked at the Hartman Institute at a certain point together, and I remember someone saying to me in a meeting, oh, you really are Israeli, so it's true. So I know how to do the American side as well. But I think that there's something about being, it's American or British or wherever you're from, that you're sort of like, I mean, it's a bad thing to say in the COVID time, but a bat. So you're not a mouse and you're not a bird. You're something in the middle. And these people who have experience of living in different places or just sort of understanding the mentality of different places are on one hand a little bit rare, but on the other hand, they're becoming more and more prevalent here in Israel. And I think that, you know, as the people who are on this discussion, and I think people who come and have actually the experience of living abroad and then coming here and experiencing Israel, they often serve as these ambassadors. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of times where there is a risk and a concern that we're creating two very separate Judaisms or two very separate peoples, and we're not actually working together. And I think that the people who go through these programs like you, May, and, you know, Gil and David and Paul, all work in this place of bringing these people together and basically creating these ambassadors who understand both sides and really work, you know, with a lot of passion to bring these two groups together and, you know, create a situation where there isn't dichotomy, but, you know, partnership.
Thanks, Laura. David?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, I don't know where the question was really heading. You know, I don't know if you're talking about sort of people to people or governments, and I don't know if you're talking about the sort of big political issues and so on. I think there aren't that many of us, diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews, and we need to work and communicate better. I don't think we communicate as well as we should at a general level. I think programs like the program that's the subject of this call are incredibly important. I dread to think what the relationship would have been like were it not for programs like the Birthright and Mossad programs, which we take for granted now, but they're relatively young, and they're crucial. I think the Israeli government, I mean, the Israelis and the Israeli government do not want to be dictated to by the diaspora. We're the people who face the consequences of our choices on the big sort of diplomatic, strategic, political issues. But if Israel is sort of the heart of the Jewish people, and if a prime minister, and our current prime minister certainly does see himself in this way, a prime minister wants to be seen as kind of a leader, if not the leader of the Jewish nation, wherever it may be. I certainly think there needs to be better communication on issues where all of world Jewry's fate and sensitivities are involved. And I think we lack a forum. So I don't know how much power you have, Paul, moderating this call, but we need some kind of better forum in which Israeli Jewish and diaspora Jewish concerns are debated and discussed just more effectively, so that if decisions are taken, all the consequences are understood. And if this path or that path is chosen or avoided, that the decisions are made with the fullest sense of what's going on. And I think it's great that we have so many people in normal times able to come here on programs. I think we need some more people going in the other direction as well. I think we need more Israelis in key positions with a better understanding of the diaspora and how it works and what its concerns are. So I think there is a lot of good and important work that needs to be done on the relationship.
Thanks, David. I want to stay with you for a second, because there was a question which was aimed at you, which was about what does a day look like for a reporter dealing with the Israeli government? I think that's also because we were supposed to have a member of Knesset who unfortunately had to cancel earlier today. So maybe you could also sort of address that sort of government side, obviously not representing the government.
Okay, that's just such a vast question. I don't know where to start. So being very specific, what's it like for our reporters, trying to cover the government? Well, it's an uphill struggle to get hold of the people you need to speak to, but often you do. We've got this new government. There should be really very, very little difficulty getting hold of very, very senior members of government, because there are so many of them. And by the way, just let's bring some levity to the conversation. I mean, we spent, I know that you think that the Times we know everything because we never get anything wrong, right? Trying to work out how many blooming ministers there are in the government. You'd think that would be pretty simple. I think there are 35. It's not completely clear to me. It is pretty clear to me that Blue and White, who are supposed to have 16, haven't named their 16th minister yet. I don't even understand how that can be, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think there's a minorities minister that they haven't even named yet. And Netanyahu in the Knesset 2-3 weeks ago rattled through the ministers, but it was this one is a minister, but the other one's coming in when this one goes to be the ambassador to the UN. Are they both ministers at the moment? Is one of them a minister without portfolio, or is he no portfolio? No, I mean, for goodness sake, just trying to understand things is very difficult. If the Knesset member who was supposed to be on this call were here, I'm sure she would say that, thank goodness, after a year plus of political deadlock, we have a functioning government now, a government that's able to do all the things that governments should be able to do. And a critic would say, yeah, but it's incredibly bloated. And by the way, working in a very difficult circumstance. We had a story, I think we put it up, maybe even today, I've lost track of what day it is. Because of the virus, the Knesset is trying to function, but the capacity of the committees where real work is done to work effectively, and crucially, the capacity of the public to physically interact with our elected representatives, very, very hamstrung at the moment. So, the challenge for reporters to find stuff out, to get access to people, to make sure that what's being done. I mean, there's a law that's going through, which is a good thing, because it's supposed to cement in law some of the regulations that have been introduced to enable the government to tackle the COVID-19 crisis. Rather than acting on emergency regulations, the Israel's judges and Knesset members themselves have realized this needs to become founded in law. They need actual legislation on that. The original draft of that legislation, once we began to understand what was in it, was really, really problematic. It seemed to give too far-reaching powers to the government, and therefore good reporting, a greater awareness of that this law was going too far, this bill was going too far. Now they seem to be, reining it in a bit and making it more sensible. Those are some of the kinds of things we deal with. We're dealing at the moment a great deal with what exactly is Netanyahu up to in terms of potential extending Israeli sovereignty to parts of the West Bank, of biblical Judea and Samaria. Seems to be that there's very, very many reasons why this looks like a bad idea and not so many where it looks like a good one. We're not even sure, the army doesn't even know what Netanyahu is doing. These are some of the things that we try to tackle. It involves ideally going out to places, meeting with people, finding out what's going on, presenting it coherently, and so on. That's what we do.
Okay, thanks, David, very much. Do we have any more questions from people on the call? Otherwise, I have a couple of questions I'm happy to ask if no one else wants to jump in. Okay, Laura, I wanted to ask you. I know that you Startup Nation, the book, talks a lot about the very specific Israeli experience and why Israel is so successful in high tech. But given that the people on this call are hoping to come to Israel, obviously from abroad, do you think there's something specific that people from places like the UK and the United States can bring to the high tech world specifically, if they were to come and, for example, or volunteer or do internships in either in a place like Startup Nation or for a high tech company?
Absolutely. I mean, I think because we're always dealing with an international audience, and I think David mentioned beforehand, we don't live in a friendly neighborhood, and we're a very, very small country. We really, really always have to be, have our eyes on the international world. And one of the challenges here is, although people learn English in school and they may or may not have had some international experience, they really need those people who are going to be able to come and represent the companies, do work that's in a clear, in an American or British accent, and with that that mindset and that understanding of the people that they're dealing with. So I definitely think that is a huge asset that people can bring with them. The other thing that I know that people are looking for is, that lack that we have in human capital here that's actually very adept at technology right now is a true challenge for the country. So if there are, people who come and do want to see their career in some kind of area that's connected to technology, programming, any kind of development, those are definitely people who are going to find their place here in this kind of tech ecosystem that we have. So I definitely think that it's a very big market. There's a lot of people looking around for talent, and talented people are well received, well paid, and it's really it's a good place and an interesting place to be working on technology.
Thank you, Laura. And Gil, I had a question for you as well. So I mentioned in the introduction your book, The Zionist Ideas, which builds on the older Herzberg book. One of the changes that you made, or one of the developments from the Herzberg book in your book, is that it includes a lot of non-Israeli voices, as in diaspora Jews, who you feel have something important to say about Zionism and Israel. Can you say something about why you felt that was important? Because obviously there'd be some, there would be, I imagine, there'd be some pushback from some people who would say, these guys didn't even make Aliyah, so what have they got to say about it?
So basically, the book is an update from a book that came out in 1959 called The Zionist Idea, because back then everybody thought in these monolithic terms. And think about it, in 1959, when the book came out, Israel was fragile. War after war, Sena, feeling embattled. But the Zionist conversation was robust. They had talked their way into a state. Today, Israel is robust, startup nation, so many other things, but the Zionist conversation has turned fragile. And I say shame on them, shame on the delegitimizers, shame on the haters, but I also say shame on us, because so many people say, oh, Zionism doesn't poll well. Zionism is, maybe we should change the term. And I've learned from my African-American friends, I've learned from my gay friends, I've learned from my feminist friends, I will not let the enemy define us. I won't let the oppressor define us. And so I'm trying to be a part of a conversation that redefines, renews, reinvigorates what Zionism is. And so in being asked and given the tremendous honor to update this book, I moved from the Zionist idea to the Zionist ideas. Open up the conversation from left to right, religious, non-religious, bring in women voices, bring in gay voices, bring in Mizrahi voices, Sephardi voices, bring in the voices that the 34 original Zionists weren't a part of. They were part of the conversation, but they didn't make it into the anthology. And then as a historian, I have to organize it until 1948 to Rabin's assassination, the first 50 years or so. And then who are we today? I call us the torchbearers. But then there were streams of Zionist thought. And the traditional streams of Zionist thought were political Zionism and religious Zionism and socialist or labor Zionism and cultural Zionism and revisionist Zionism. And those were the Zionisms that sang, Anu banu artsa livnotu lihibanot ba, we've come here to build and be rebuilt. But I felt it was important to add a sixth school of thought, Diaspora Zionism. And that's part of the identity Zionist conversation that I was talking about, the cherry tomato Zionist conversation, which has to happen both in Israel and the diaspora. And if you'll permit me, one of those awful light bulb jokes, you know, how many gurus does it take to change a light bulb? You have to trust your inner light. How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? You can only change if you want to change. How many men does it take to change a light bulb? One, and he holds the light bulb and he thinks the whole world revolves around him. How many feminists does it take to change a light bulb? That's not funny. How many Zionists does it take to change a light bulb? 5. 1, to screw the light bulb. 2 more to sing around, go around singing and dancing, saying, Anu banu artsa livnot lihibanot ba, we've returned to the land. The 4th to write the check. And the 5th to complain about the media coverage, David. Once upon a time, the role of diaspora Zionists was just to write checks and complain about the media coverage. And the whole opportunity here, the whole excitement, and David's right, it's really the last 20 years of a revolution of birthright and Masa and this emergence of identity Zionism, is to say, no, your job, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, is not just to write the check, not just to complain about the media coverage, but to be a part of the conversation of who am I and who I can be. And to teach Israelis and be a part of the conversation with Israelis about the extraordinary possibilities inherent in this place. They have a tendency sometimes to take it for granted. And we, diaspora Jews, I've paid taxes in Canada, the US, and Israel, so I can say we wherever is convenient. We have a tendency sometimes to go, oh, wow, cool, neat, awesome. And sometimes we have to remember that it's also a very normal society. And they have to remember, wow, what an extraordinary place. We're talking about startup nation. We're talking about Israel at the cutting edge of COVID. And I'm thinking of the Israel from the 1970s when it was much more of a kibbutz. Who would have ever thought that it would be capitalist and it would be successful and it would be cutting edge science? And that's the excitement of this small place that's still in formation. And that's what I was trying to do with Diaspora Zionism, to say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to learn from one another, to build those bridges. And right now I'm actually working on translating the book, not just into Hebrew, but into Israeli. And the publisher, the first thing he said was, he said, I get that you have diaspora Zionism, because we Israelis have to remember there's a whole conversation going outside of Israel, because we're one people asking these broader questions, not just about the Jewish people, as I was saying earlier, but about what does it mean to be a liberal nationalist? What does it mean to be a part of this crazy thing called democracy in the insane 21st century?
Okay, thank you. David, there was a question from Hedva Engel, who wanted clarification on something you said. You mentioned some legislation based on the COVID situation, and you said that it was problematic. Could you give some examples of that?
Yeah, the early draft, or at least the reported draft of that law, for example, would have given police, we were told, the right to enter people's homes without a warrant. I assume something to do with checking that people who were supposed to be quarantined were quarantining and so on. There was provisions for quite a lengthy period of emergency style regulations. I think every 3 months or so, and the Knesset would look again. So that first clause about entering your home without a warrant is not in the legislation as it's taking shape now. I think the law as it stands now, and it hasn't been passed, would be, you'd have to check it every month if the if these quite stringent various rules were still remaining in force and so on. They're still working on it. They had a cabinet meeting just a few hours ago, and rather than continue the Knesset process with the draft as it is, they're looking at it again. So it's being changed, as it goes along. Keep an eye, and we'll try and report, of course, what's in the final legislation. But it's changed, and it's changing. I just want to say one other thing on the Startup Nation thing, relates to what I do for a living and what Laura does and what Gil's spoken about, and some of the things that I don't know might be available to people on this call when they come to Israel. My favorite piece that I've written lately was about, let's work it out, about 3 weeks ago. And sorry for pushing my own thing here, but it was written really with a lot of info from a guy called Saul Singer. Saul Singer is the co-author of Startup Nation, and therefore very close, I'm sure, to Laura and her work as well. And I wrote it after Iran announced that they were not only banning all use of Israeli technology, but that the use of Israeli technology in any form, and they actually specified hardware and software, so computer stuff, is now a crime against God. In Iran. That's actually a law that passed in the Iranian parliament, and the president of Iran, the moderate Hassan Rouhani, then signed off on this law. So they're not allowed to use any Israeli tech. And so I wrote a piece with a lot of input from Saul. And the headline is Iran has banned all use of Israeli tech, really, ? That would set it back 50 years. And it's just, it's kind of lighthearted, but there's a real core of seriousness about it. And it speaks to the centrality of Israeli innovation in how the modern world functions in many of its most positive ways. I mean, you actually you can't really use computers or the internet if you're not using Israeli tech, and read the piece and you'll find out more. But even things like, oil refining, which is quite important to Iran, that most of their oil is refined abroad, but Israeli tech is central to some of the monitoring processes and the defenses. Iran's exports, who are the key sort of people regulating and keeping track of shipping, and what programs do they use? Well, there's Israeli innovation all over this. Medical stuff, the amount of Israeli innovation in all the things that help people stay alive, keep them alive, central to heart surgery, for example, are Israeli innovations. So this incredibly thriving country in the most complicated circumstances is just something that I thought was worth highlighting.
Beautiful.
Great, thanks, David. Do we have any more questions? There's an interesting question here, which this I think will be the last question for the panel, and then we'll move talk from Josh and Rochelle about Masa. So this is from Catherine Berger, who asks, has the Black Lives Matter movement in America had any impact on racism in Israel? You also take that on. Small question.
I'll go first. I mean, I think that there's, you have seen protests. All our protests by definition are fairly small at the moment because of social distancing requirements. But there are certainly people who have highlighted. I think parallels is the wrong word here. There are echoes. This is a country that has absorbed and in most cases rescued tens of thousands of Black Jews from Ethiopia. Their integration in Israeli society, especially the people who came not in the 70s but in the 90s and often came from remote parts of Ethiopia, has not been an easy process. We have a lot to be proud of at the moment. For example, in our very large Israeli government, they were able, to their credit, to find room. We have the first Ethiopian origin Israeli minister, female minister. She's responsible for immigration. We are not perfect in terms of the integration of all sectors. And by the way, Russian immigration, huge numbers, not the most straightforward of integration processes. The Ethiopian community in particular does not have it easy here. Again, I don't want to make comparisons, but the specific answer to your question is there is a little bit of resonance here, and certainly room to pay attention to areas where we could do better without going to an effort to draw a parallel. I don't think there are absolute parallels. I think there are issues that we need to tackle effectively in Israel, and there's certainly some resonance.
If I could just add something, it's funny when we were talking earlier about the legislation. Just to give a personal anecdote, I came back to Israel at the very start of March, so I had to go into 2 weeks. My whole family had to go into 2 weeks of what's called bidud, of isolation, and we self-reported. So we signed up with the police, with the hotline that we're going to 2 weeks of isolation. And the next morning at 7:30, the bell rings, and we look out, and it's a policeman. It happens to be an Ethiopian policeman, and he says, "Are you all in your room? And are you all in quarantine?" And we go, "Yes." And he says, "Well, how many of you are there?" And we say 5. They say, "Well, let me see the kids." We say, "Well, the kids are sleeping. We just came back from the States." He goes, "Ah, chamudim," which means sweetie pies. They happen to be 18, 20, and 25, but they're still our kids. And we start having this back and forth with him. And the fact that he was Ethiopian was irrelevant. And so there are successes and failures, dramatic successes and dramatic failures. And there is also always that sense of mishpacha, of family, of intimacy. So I hope that we can benefit from the conversation that's going on in the United States without having to pay the price. And that there is always kind of a back and forth where sometimes the United States learns from us and sometimes we learn from the United States. But I have to say, the other day I was jogging down Jaffa Street and frankly enjoying the fact that we have plate glass windows which are intact, that we haven't had looting, that we haven't had the kind of social disorder that my daughter, who's in Chicago, is experiencing and witnessing. And it goes back to what David was saying at the beginning, that for all our craziness and all our ability to fight about absolutely anything and everything all the time, there also is a certain kind of social cohesion. We've had incredibly moving moments during Passover and during Yom HaZikaron, our Memorial Day, people going on their balconies or opening up their windows and singing Hatikva, singing the national anthem, singing the 4 questions. And this has been a stressful period for so many of us. There's been a difficult economic period for so many of us, but there also have been these moments. And so I'm hoping we can learn from the trauma that America is undergoing and incorporate it into our constant striving to do better. When David Ben-Gurion was asked in the 1960s, well, that country that you helped establish in 1948, did it fulfill all your dreams? He said, not yet. And that's the kind of Zionist I am. I'm a cherry tomato Zionist, but I'm also a not yetist. We're always dreaming, we're always stretching, we're always aspiring, we're always hoping to learn from one another. So come join us and be a not yetist with me.
Thank you, Gil. Laura, did you want to add anything? Final words, either in answer to that question or maybe just a final thought as this is the last question.
Well, I just spoke to a colleague of mine in New York a few days ago, and I actually said to him, asked him about the riots there, because I feel like so often we're defending ourselves. People see riots on TV here and they think, we're living in a war zone, which we sometimes are. But I think that oftentimes in our neighborhoods, we feel very safe. We feel safe. We feel comfortable. And we don't feel like what's being shown on TV abroad is actually what reflects our life here. And so it was interesting to me because I said to him, it's almost like the opposite situation right now. I'm watching the riots there and I'm wondering if the same thing is happening in the States that I'm used to having here. And people are saying, maybe you'll say to me, oh, it's not so bad. They're just kind of blowing it up. He actually said it was worse than what I was probably seeing on TV. So I understood that it was, being shown in a way that was probably pretty fair. But it was just a kind of weird thing that all of a sudden I felt like the tables were turning. And as Gil was saying, are you seeing me? People in the States saying that to us. And I thought that was very interesting because it was sort of a twist and it took what I'm used to usually having the opposite situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura, and thank you. I think that'll be the last question. I want to thank all 3 of you, Laura Gilinski and Gil Troy and David Horowitz, for your time. It's now that Israel is thankfully sort of moving again, we're all becoming a little bit busier, and not just with our kids. I've got 3 kids sleeping in the other room, hopefully, so I can speak from a bit of experience. But yeah, we're all a bit busier now, and I really appreciate, we really appreciate your time joining us this evening. Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask Rochelle and Josh to talk about Masa now, and David, Gil, and Laura, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Pleasure, everybody. Take care, everyone.
All.
Come on, have coffee with us.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Rochelle Vivian Bell. I'm the director of the Israel Government Fellows, and I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about the program, and then I'm gonna pass it off to Josh, who's gonna talk a lot more about Masa itself. I know some of you are here because you're interested in Masa programs in general, and some of you are interested in Israel Government Fellows. So I'm just gonna keep it very short. Because it's probably, the Masa aspect is much more relevant. One thing that I do want to mention at the start of this is that, you know, we talked a lot about the COVID-19 situation over the last hour, I guess, over the last hour. It came up a few times. I do want to mention that our program is a very boutique program. We only take about roughly 20 people per year. And because of that, we actually, the coronavirus situation, the pandemic, affected us much more than a lot of the other Masa programs that are much larger. And so we're actually, we had to make the decision not to open up this coming year, but we will be taking applications for September 2021. So we're just taking a little bit of a break, and then we'll go back to normal. You guys had the opportunity to hear from our, actually a few of our speakers just now, which was fantastic. A big part of our program, we have two aspects to our program. We have the internship program, where people have the opportunity to spend time working with directors of different departments in the Israeli government and also in NGOs. Everyone has a mentor. They have projects in English. They have the opportunity to advance their careers and just really do some really interesting things within the Israeli government, within Israeli NGOs, policy research NGOs, and they get to sort of give to Israeli society and leave their mark in Israel. But the other aspect that we have is our education wing. We have the internship and the education. Paul, who you've heard from the last hour, is actually our education advisor. So he's heavily involved with our education and does an excellent job. And you get to hear from high-level thinkers, academics, politicians, activists, people from all sides of the coin. We really try to show different challenges in Israeli society. We take different challenges and we try to look at them from a broad range of perspectives. So you have the opportunity to come here and learn what people are talking about here on the ground. What are those conversations? You're not just hearing an echo chamber of what people are saying in your home countries. You get to come here and you get to hear whether we agree with those things or not. We don't actually take a position on anything. We want people to come here, experience the challenges on the ground, and to actually hear what the discussion is and hear from and make their own decisions. So those are the two main points of our program. With it, there are things like we have trips around the country. We have Hebrew Ulpan lessons. Much like Josh will tell you, a lot of some of these things are things that all Masa programs will have. Things like Ulpan, Hebrew lessons. And various things. We have a lot of additional things that we add into the program. I think that's basically the general overview of the program. I'm sure there are a lot of specifics that if you're interested in the program, you could definitely reach out to me and talk to me. Either reach out to me here or just shoot me a message on here and say, I'm interested in Israel Government Fellows, and I'll reach out to you directly, and we can have someone from our marketing department, our marketing coordinator, reach out to you and really give you an in-depth description and answer. We can answer all of your questions. I'm happy to take questions here as well, but I think I'm going to pass it off to Josh so that he can talk more about Masa Masa in general.
Thank you so much. And firstly, thank you all for staying. For those of you that stayed to hear a little bit about this, very thankful for that. So I wanted to start this off by, I suppose it's framing a little bit of some of the things that we were talking around COVID. So I haven't been out of my house for 2.5 months, and everything is shut down. Everything that we hear about is this program in Israel is not happening, and this place to go for coffee is not open, my school's not open, my university's not open. But one thing that I would like to say that was announced last week is that actually Masa programs are open in general. So the skies are open for Masa participants. The only people at the moment that are going to be allowed into Israel in September is going to be Israeli citizens and Masa participants, which is amazing. So, and one of the things that I think is coming on a Masa program, you know, with all of the worries that we've all got, you know, I've got worries, my parents have got worries about their job. My cousin, my sister, my friends are all worried about their jobs. And the one place that we feel can be the remedy for a lot of those concerns is coming to Israel on Masa programs. Laura mentioned that and I'll talk about one specific program first. She mentioned that there are 18,000 unfilled tech positions in Israel. And there is a smaller workforce. So they're looking for people in the diaspora to come in and fill those jobs. We launched a brand new program. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to run starting off with COVID in May, but in September and October time, we've actually launched a program called Masa Tech, which you can come and you can work in the tech industry and you can get paid up to 14,000 shekels a month, which is, just so you can give some context, that's higher than my salary. So you could come and that is potentially available for you. You know, it's a brand new program that not many people know about. Few other programs, you know, your typical internship programs where you can come and work in a plethora of industries is one, but also we launched a brand new program for those people from primarily English-speaking countries. We've got a program called Masa Fast Track Pro, where you can come and you can work in an industry and get paid. In those industries, we have somebody working in robotics. We've got somebody working in the fashion industry. We've got people working in a whole range of stuff. And also on top of that, we've got a program that's been established for about 10 years called Masa Israel Teaching Fellows, where for a very small amount of money, $1,000, 750 pounds, I did that translation in my head. Actually, I'm not sure if that's the exact translation of the currency at the moment. You can come and you can teach in a school in Israel, teach English. And actually at the moment, it's very, very important that a lot of young Israelis are getting to know the English language, but with an English or American accent, a native English speaking accent. So that's another really great option. Or you can come, you know, one of the things that people are worried about, you know, I've read a report that 1 in 5 Jews in the UK or in North America or around the world are looking to defer entry at university for a year with the lack of clarity is what is going to happen. So one of the things that we're thinking about is, you know, opening up to current university students, some of you I understand are as well, is to come and to do your online courses at university, which is going to happen, and do that from Israel and come and get some professional skills, come and get some, you know, experiences, or just that opportunity that you never ever had the opportunity to do because life was so hectic. You know, there was a set path that you were going through in your life, and you know that was sacred. But now obviously, you know, the situation's changed and there's a lack of clarity in a lot of places. And we really think that Israel is a great opportunity for you, at least during this time of, uncertainty. So that's really what I'll say. Yes, you know, Rochelle is right that you get Ulpan, you get a place to stay in many of the programs, you get trips around the country, you get to meet lifelong friends, all of that great stuff. But really what you're going to get is that this is going to be an opportunity for you to not press pause on your life and not to try and do things that, you know, are not in line with your journey. We feel like we can fulfill some of those ambitions to keep you on that path to get you to where you need to be. So that's what I'll say. This is actually the first time I've talked about Masa properly post-COVID. It's a very different language to when I was talking about this a few months ago. But you know, I'm around for a conversation. You know, dip your feet in the water. You never know what you can find, and we have 400 programs, so you never know what could be a good fit for you. And you'll all receive an email after this, and everybody that couldn't make it as well, with contact details. Registration is going to actually officially open a little bit late compared to previous years in about 9 days. So this is perfect timing. You know, obviously within that you get opportunities to get grants and scholarships. It's kind of primarily what we've been known for in the past, even though it's completely not the only thing that we should be known for. So you can get grants and scholarships for your programs, whatever you choose, there will be something available for you. And I'm around to have a conversation, you know, whether you're in Germany, whether you're in Italy, whether you're in the United States or the UK or Canada, there's somebody locally within your area that can reach out to you and have a conversation with you. It can't hurt to have a conversation. And, you know, at the moment we need to spread our net as wide as possible. So that's what I'll say. We can open it out for any questions now for either about Israel Government Fellows or about Masa more generally, or if you've just got a question about life, or you just want to kind of just like, you know, unload on your life situation and we can discuss that, or, you know, you can contact me separately or contact Israel Government Fellows separately, whatever you want to do. But thank you for staying and listening. And I'm going to stay here until the last person leaves the call. So, you know, I will hang around, and if any of you wants to fire a question at me or for the Israel Government Fellows team, we're here. So yeah, I'm going to stop talking. And if anybody wants to write in the chat or just, you know, speak, that's cool. Otherwise you can leave and eat your dinner or your brunch if you're in North America. You're a very brunch nation. I've got a question that came to me privately. What specific areas in Israel Government Fellows can you do? Like, what are the kind of types of internships? Like, is there something around diplomacy within that or other fields? So that's the question that came through.
Sure. So actually a lot of our people, a lot of our participants are interested in diplomacy. We have different types of people who come into our program. We don't specifically take people who are political science majors, international relations majors, etc. But we do actually have a lot of people who come in and say, hey, you know what? I'm really interested in working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because I want to become a diplomat, maybe in my home country or maybe for Israel. So we do actually have people who are interested in that type of work. Within the I'm just going to use the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as an example. Within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have roughly, we can officially take, I believe, 6 people every single year. And that's based on the space that they have available. But we have roughly 8 or 9 positions. And that includes, I don't know who's asking this or what their interests are, but that includes working for the North American Congress desk or working for the UN, or working, I'm sorry, with the Israeli arm that works with the UN. Working on, there's actually a program within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that works specifically on cybersecurity. There are different desks related to different countries. So, you know, if someone is interested in a specific region of Europe or even Eurasia, there's a desk for Eurasia. There's work dedicated to those particular regions, or South America, etc. So there are a lot of positions available in that realm. I brought up that we take people from all different backgrounds, and I'll just quickly mention that we do take only university graduates. Okay, so you have to have at least finished a first degree. Many have, you know, I would say maybe, what percentage? I would say roughly maybe a third of our participants have finished a second degree, like a master's or beyond, or done something else. It's helpful to have work experience, although not necessary. You know, we can also count things like working in, you know, student organizations or internships, volunteer experience. A lot of those things are very relevant, often very relevant. But we really like to have a mix of people who come from a variety of backgrounds, because we work specifically with the executive branch of government. So we're working with, you know, like I said, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of the Ministry of Social Services, working directly with those ministries, working more on the policy side of things than on the politics side of things. So when I say policy within the government, and also with all of these NGOs who directly affect policy. And actually, in some ways, a lot of these NGOs have oftentimes, depending on what it is that they're doing, can have a stronger influence. The work that people do in the NGOs can have a very, very strong influence on government, and they can do things that actually affect policy within the government. So we have such a variety of different positions, some that are more research focused, others that are more focused on working with delegations. So if a delegation comes into Israel, they'll have the opportunity to spend some time with them and to take them around, guide them. Other types of positions. Sometimes digital marketing, or working on, we have economists who come in, or lawyers who come in, and so they'll be working more in their field. So it really depends on what your background is. We have such a variety of positions available. And our mentors are fantastic. I really want to give a shout out to the mentors that we have, because the mentors that we have throughout we've culled them over the years. So over time, we've just ended up with better and better mentors. At the end of every session, we take a look and say, who are the ones who really stood out? We aren't just picky about our participants, we're picky about the people who are mentoring our participants, because they're the ones who make the program. So that way people aren't just doing an internship, they're actually developing personally, and they're gaining that experience that they wouldn't be able to gain otherwise. I should also mention that we're a part of the Menachem Begin. I'm actually sitting here in the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. It's sort of, for those of you who aren't aware of what the Menachem Begin Heritage Center is, it's similar to a presidential library within Israel. I guess the Israeli equivalent. I'm American, so that's what I can equate it to, is a presidential library. And I'm also Israeli, but I'm both. But essentially, we work with the Menachem Begin Heritage Center is able to help us in a lot of ways get the best mentors, also get the best, because of our relationship with the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. We're able to get people, these top speakers who come in all the time. The people who you just heard from. It's a relationship with the Menachem Begin Heritage Center that allows us a lot of the opportunities that we have, especially with our connections with our mentors and our contract with the Civil Service Commission that allows us to work with within the Israeli government. So I hope that answered whoever's question that was.
Great, thank you so much. We got a question through from Catherine. Thank you so much. Even though I think she may have, no, Catherine's still here. So Catherine asked, do Masa participants have the opportunity to interact with non-Jewish Israeli culture? Absolutely, yes. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So the first is, as I mentioned before, Masa Israel Teaching Fellows. So many of the schools that you will teach in on Masa Israel Teaching Fellows are in the periphery of Israeli society, so lower socioeconomic class. And not to say that everybody that is not Jewish is from a lower socioeconomic class, but many of them are. And we have some of the schools that you'll get to teach in. They range from working in Rahat. So Rahat is a Bedouin, I think city, maybe town, city, verging on between the two. It's definitely the biggest area, urban area with Bedouin in the country. You can work in Nazareth, you can work in Ramla. Many of these cities are mixed cities. And so you get the opportunity to actually teach young people, not just Jewish young people, which is super amazing as well. When I was on my Masa program, I had the opportunity actually in the north of the country to teach both Jewish and Muslim and Christian kids all in one classroom, and it was super inspiring. And another program is with an organization, actually some of those programs are with an organization called Bina, but Bina also have their own program, which is based in South Tel Aviv. And that area, for those of you that know, has a big African refugee community there as well. So you will get to work and engage with the community there and with their struggles. For those of you that haven't been before, One of the most interesting drives in the whole of Israel is driving from north of Tel Aviv to south of Tel Aviv and seeing the difference along the way. Something you don't see from your regular postcard or your, to be honest, your birthright trip. Yeah, so I think that, you know, engaging with that community on that program is a really, really fantastic option. Those are just two examples. You know, whether or not I've met so many non-Jewish people, and like obviously with Masa programs as opposed to many other programs, is that you have a lot of independent time as well to go and engage in your own initiatives, to travel around the country as well, and you get to meet many different people with many different stories, and yeah, that's what I will say for that.
I want to add to what Josh said about Masa programs in general. Masa programs all have a certain number of educational outputs that we're required to meet, and I'm speaking on behalf of Masa programs in general. And there are a variety of things that we want all participants to encounter when they're here in Israel. And one of those things is encountering populations throughout Israel, which they wouldn't necessarily meet in their home countries. So part of that is, it's actually a very important part of Mossad to come to Israel and encounter encounter other Jewish communities who they wouldn't necessarily encounter, you know, maybe meeting with a Haredi community, an ultra-Orthodox community, or but also meeting with non-Jews. That means meeting with Christians, Druze, Bedouin, Palestinians, Israeli, Arab Christians, as many of these populations as possible, you know, to a varying degree, but it is a very important part of the Masa experience.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else? I realize that there are still 15 people, and I don't know if anybody's got any questions. Oh, here we go. We've got another one. For the Mossad Tech program, does this include working on sales team, capital raising, investor relations at an Israeli VC tech hedge fund? So that program doesn't. That program is a lot around coding and actually creation of tech. However, many people on a different program called Masa Fast Track Pro have worked more in the kind of marketing, fundraising, that type of stuff within that program. So this program, the Mossad Tech program, was fulfilling a need around developers in that area, and how there's thousands of roles at. But we, again, do have an additional program, which I'm happily, Isaac, to speak to you separately about that. You can respond to the email that you receive following this call, and you can like pre-register and specifically for that program and just see whether you know whether something fits and stuff. So yeah, sorry that I didn't say the answer like yes to your question, but there are other opportunities as well to make money as well. Anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, it's just going to be me sitting here with 15 people. That's very exciting. Cool. Well, I guess that maybe then we should call it a day. I think it's a very British term, so that's just to end the call. But it's been a real pleasure getting to know loads of you, answering your questions, and giving you the opportunity to hear. So I also want to thank, obviously, the Israel Government Fellows team, because they're amazing. And putting on a really interesting panel, and yeah, enjoy your dinner, your lunch, your brunch, lunch, breakfast, whatever it is. Isaac, I'll just write a number in. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you. And I think actually, I forgot to mention one of our alumni is actually in here. I see him. Sam, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Sam.
Hi.
It's nice to hear from you.
It's nice to hear from you. I was just on here because my younger brother is curious and Israel Government Fellow, so it's always a pleasure to be on a call. And as I was saying to Jacob, like we heard Gil Troy, he came to speak with, I'm pretty sure. Horowitz came to speak with us too, but it's always nice hearing these like really great figures talk about Israel in a really in-depth place. And I spent a lot of time in Israel after IGF, and I did a lot of educational programs, and nothing really compares to IGF. And the amount of insights you get into Israel and the Israelis through this program is like truly amazing and unprecedented. So I highly recommend this program, and it is a worthwhile endeavor.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. We miss you.
We should have brought you in. We should have got you in a bit earlier to say
I
that.
know. I blinked. I saw his name on there, and I said, "Oh, Sam's here." I should have had you speak a while ago.
It's all right.
How's everything going? How are you? You're at home?
Yeah, I just finished my first year of rabbinical school, and I got home 3 or 4 days ago.
Oh, that's great. Oh my gosh, rabbinical school already. When are you sending? When does the next Ryan's brother get here?
The next Ryan's brother will get to IGF hopefully in the next session if it'll happen. We'll make the 3P.
Hey, 2021.
Yeah, in 2021.
Oh, great, wonderful. Sam's was actually the second Ryan's brother to join us. Your younger brother was here first, right? Or sorry,
My
older
older
brother.
brother Josh was with Paul, and then I was with you and Jacob.
It's like you know, those camps in North America that, and in the same here, that are like they're like the families of camp, right? It's the same family of IGF.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, the lights just turned out in the Begin Center. Yeah, we have a few like that. We have several alumni who are generations of alumni.
I just find it really funny, like. So does that mean that when you have kids, if you have kids, they're going to also go to IGF when they're 21, 22?
I hope so. Yeah, why not?
Wow.
There are no lights here. All right.
But when the program starts in 2021, the lights will be back in.
Yeah.
Back on, I promise.
You know. Actually, I was promised that only the AC was going to was going to turn off, but apparently that's not the case. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to stop recording because I think that's